Hello, my name is Andrew Shahan. I am an early childhood special educator here in the United States in San Francisco. And I've been working with children with autism, children with developmental disabilities, and families for about the last 30 years. And I'm very excited and honored that I have the opportunity to have a conversation with Guy Shahar, who started the Transforming Autism project a few years ago. And Guy and I are just going to have a conversation about his experience, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to get to know him a little bit more. And Guy and I connected about a year ago and have had some wonderful conversations over the course of that year. So again, I feel like I always learn and I always grow every time I get a chance to talk to Guy. So I'm very excited to just to have this opportunity together with Guy. So I'll say first that having worked for many years in the field with children with autism, I've always been very, very hungry for a deeper understanding about autism, about individuals with autism, about in many ways what um, is similar or different in some ways to a person with autism's perspective on the world, um, ability to have relationships or communicate with people. I learned so much. I've learned so much over the years from individuals with autism, and one of the greatest gifts I've received was the ability to better understand myself as a person, as a human being, by really learning from people with autism and interacting with people with autism. And it's been an incredible gift and journey for me to again have a much deeper understanding of all of the things that make me human, right? My ability to communicate and self-regulate um, and build relationships. I didn't have so much understanding or awareness of that in many ways prior to working with and getting to know people on the spectrum. So I'll always be grateful for to the autistic community for that. And so that said, when I came into contact with Guy's website, I saw immediately the Transforming Autism project, and I thought, ooh, that sounds very cool to sort of really be thinking in that way about autism. And then I quickly bought Guy's book called Transforming Autism, and I read the whole thing and was touched, was moved by Guy's story as well as by some of the questions he was raising about some of the assumptions we make about autism. So of course, then eventually I went back to Guy's website and then connected with him ultimately, and I always look forward to reading Guy's articles because he always comes out with some exciting and interesting and I think very unique perspective about um, autism and parenting someone on the spectrum, et cetera, et cetera. So, so that said, I'd like to say I'm excited to excuse the background noise. Um, I'm excited to be with Guy and have this opportunity to talk a bit more. And um, that's my introduction. So, Guy, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here with you. And yeah, is there anything you'd like to say about yourself as an introduction?
Uh, I don't think so. I think you've said more than enough about me.
Okay, very good. Well, I think the first thing that I'm most curious about is, at some point you had the idea based on everything that you'd been through with, with your son Daniel and his diagnosis and your journey with him. You had the idea to kind of put your experience out there to the world through a book and then eventually a website. So I'm just wondering if you could share a bit more about what kind of the impetus or what motivated you to take that risk, because there's certainly a lot of families that have been through what you've been through and not maybe taken that same leap to share it with the world.
Yeah, and I often actually, before writing the book, I often looked at other parents of autistic children and thought, wow, they're doing so much. I'm never going to be able to do anything like that, even a tiny fraction of it. I never decided to write a book. In fact, I was at work at my job one day in early 2016, and somebody I was in a meeting with somebody who found it equally tedious as I did, and we went outside and we just talking, and she said to me, "Why don't you write a book about your experiences with your son?" And I said, "No, absolutely no way. I'm right in the middle of this experience. It's going to be many years before I get enough perspective. I don't remember all of the things that happened. I don't have detailed records of anything. And besides, I don't actually even have time to read a book, let alone write one. I don't know how to write a book." So I put that to bed. She accepted it, and that was the end of the conversation. And then when I got home that night, without realizing even what I was doing, I found myself typing an introduction to the book. And it was just happening, and I didn't realize what I was doing until I was halfway through, and I thought, I wonder why I'm doing that. And then the same thing happened every morning before going to work, every evening when I came back from work. I had no time. There was no possibility of doing this. But I found myself spending half an hour here, half an hour there, adding to it and building on it, and not really knowing what I was doing or why. Having had no idea that it would actually eventually become a book. I just thought, it might be a pamphlet or something by the end. It happened by itself, basically. And when I started typing it, it was almost as if I did a bit of research. I went through all of the emails and the reports and things that we had, but it wasn't really very much. All of the details came flooding back only at the point when I was writing it. It was it feels like it wrote itself, basically. And actually, from that moment, the whole history of the charity has been like that. It's carried me with it, rather than it hasn't felt like I've been the one directing it.
Wow. It's such a it's a very unique way to frame the writing process in many ways, because I've heard people say that have written, it was like, well, the book just kind of wrote me versus I wrote the book. But clearly there was something very, very deep inside of you that was compelled to put your experience into words in that way. And it almost sounds like you didn't feel like you were choosing, right? You were making some sort of conscious decision. I want to write a book, and it was almost like your thoughts, your feelings, all of the stuff that was inside of you about it just really wanted an outlet and wanted to come out in writing. So that's how it sounds to me. Which
no, it's very much like that, and I didn't know what that thing was that I had to express until I actually expressed it. And there's one particular chapter in the book, chapter 4, which is called "What is Autism Really?" and it became the foundation for the TED Talk in the end. I had no idea that I saw things in that way until it came out.
Wow. And so as, for example, as you were writing chapter 4, do you remember, like, as you put, whether it was pen to paper or whether you were typing, whatever it was, do you remember reading what you'd written and then how you sort of reacted to it, or what thoughts you had as you were then reading what you just written, especially with something like chapter 4? Do you remember any of that?
With that chapter in particular, it had its own unique story. The ideas within it, it's basically the genesis of the Transforming Autism project. it's the ideas that came out in the TED talk about seeing autism primarily as a really beautiful condition and one that's about sensitivity rather than seeing it as a disability, and putting some flesh around that. The whole thing came in meditation one morning, sort of in seed form. And I just had to struggle because I had the most horrendous day at work, and I had to struggle to get it out, to find the time to sort of write it. So it was the most unconducive day to do any writing, but it still all came out, and it sort of came out intact during that day. And yes, it came actually in the meditation in the morning. It came with floods of tears, because it was, you know, it was something that felt like it was new to me. I mean, clearly it wasn't. Clearly I built it up. I'd built up that understanding over the years, but it felt like it was new to me when I wrote it. Came with floods of tears. It sort of had a difficult birth during the day. And the interesting thing is the following day, when I woke up in the morning, I actually couldn't stand up. And for about 3 months after that, I was effectively housebound. I didn't have the energy to get up and leave the house. I didn't have the energy, the mental energy, to sit and read my emails and respond to them. I had 3 months solidly off work, unable to go. But the interesting thing is, the one thing I was able to do during that time is to write the book. So I get 1,000 words out a day, 2,000 words out a day, and I didn't have the energy to put that energy into anything else.
Wow. That's quite something. That it's that clear to you that you so much of your mental, emotional, psychological energy was channeled into writing the book that you had, that any other daily task or going out into the world and interacting with people was overwhelming, because you didn't have energy left for it.
But I didn't have that. I mean, even if I put the book to one side, I wouldn't have had the energy for it. It's not that I did the work on the book and it wiped me out. It's that if I decided not to do the book, I still wouldn't have had energy to do the other things. I only had access to that energy to do one thing.
Wow. And then at what point in the writing process, it sounds like it was a very intensive 3-month period.
Yeah.
At what point was it, how was this sort of the shift then from what felt like maybe finishing the book to integrating a bit more back into daily life? What was that like?
It was a bit strange, because the process of writing the book it felt like it was involuntary. It wasn't something that I'd chosen to do. It was a task that felt like it had been hoisted on me, and I did it, and it was a very enjoyable thing at a time when not much else was enjoyable at that period. And having done it, it was like, okay, so that's done. What next? And I didn't have a next direction. So, you know, I finished the book within about 6 weeks. It was finished, start to finish. And then I just had this sense of, well, something should follow from that, and I have no idea what that would be. So I had that it felt like quite a long period. It was a period of a few months where there was no direction. It just felt, okay, so a book's just plonked into the world, and what happens with it. I don't know how the TED Talk idea came about, but I met a guy who was a curator at TED, at one of the local TEDs in Wandsworth, in the summer of that year. So it was about March, April that the book was finished. It was about July probably that I met this guy, and you know, he was happy for me to go and to book a slot at the TED in Wandsworth that year. That was the next step. By the time that had happened, I had met another guy called Gilles, who co-founded the charity with me the following year. And you know, we'd started having, I'd lost my job by that time for not being well enough. And you know, we'd started having ideas about starting the charity. So it sort of went in that direction.
Sorry, can you hear the background noise?
Okay.
has gotten a bit loud. It will. I'm going to go ahead and place my headset. Hopefully, we'll cut out a bit of the background noise. Let's see. We'll see if that changes anything. Has it cut out any of the noise?
I can't hear any now.
Oh, very good. The magic of the microphone. And so it sounds like, again, the TED Talk then followed the book. And I know your TED Talk has received a lot of, I think, both attention as well as confirmation especially from the autistic community. Individuals have reached out to you, responded, and talked about how much your perspective really resonated with them. Can you share a bit more about that and about some of what you've heard or received from, particularly from individuals with autism, about your talk?
Yeah, and it's really humbling, and it's really, you know, in a lot of ways, the feedback that autistic people have given me about the talk and the confirmation that this is, you know, in line with how they experience the world, this is almost what's kept me going in a lot of ways. Because I told you how the ideas came to me, and I had no way of really confirming whether that was the case for large numbers of other people either. But the TED Talks received a lot of comments from autistic adults who've said things along the lines of, it's the first time I've heard autism, you know, communicated about what it is in a way that I can relate to. And we've put some of it, you know, there's a web page on our website now, which is transformingautism.org/autism. And you know, you can see some of the good feedback it's got from autistic people. But yeah, it's been really, it's meant a lot to me to have that, and it's been confirmation that, you know, keep going, which I wouldn't otherwise have had.
So it sounds like it's really it's moved you in many ways, propelled you to keep going in terms of your efforts with transforming autism, but also your efforts to keep writing and keep putting your perspective out, ideally so that more and more people have access to it.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
And are there things for you that also have been challenging about being able to keep going and to put your to again, like, as much as you've drawn inspiration from the feedback you've received, I wonder if there's also been there have also been challenges for you in terms of really putting your experience into words and putting your thoughts and your perspective out there, you know, to the world, especially in, you know, from what I enjoy and appreciate so much about your how you write, Guy. You're so you have a sensitivity and a transparency and a deep honesty about how you write that's very disarming and very refreshing. So I would imagine also in that process, and I you know, I don't know, something I know is true for me is that sometimes when I'm writing something, or when I'm opening up and being incredibly open and honest about something I've experienced or been through, it's not always easy to not only to put it into words, but then to share it, like, widely or publicly with the world. And I really appreciate that so much about how you've done this, because I think there are probably many people that not only who can resonate or relate to your experience and what you're sharing, but who wouldn't be able to take necessarily that leap and put themselves out there as well. So I wonder if there have been some obstacles or challenges along the way to doing that.
Well, thank you for those comments. Yes. I mean, it's not a challenge to put it into words. It's not a challenge really for me to sort of put it out there, except, you know, just nervousness about how it will go down with people, because each time it's sort of, you know, I'm not being provocative, but it is challenging general ways of thinking, including my old way of thinking. The only challenge really for me is that I can't do it. I can't do it on demand. If you say, Guy, I need an article next week, I'll say, well, good luck, because it comes when it comes. It comes when it's ready. And sometimes there's a period of months and months between articles. Sort of like the book, because it comes when it's ready. When there's something to come, it comes. If there's nothing to come, it doesn't matter what I want to do, it doesn't come.
Yeah, and so I think that's an important, also that really spotlights how, I guess how authentic the process is for you, that it has to almost bubble up from inside of you, versus following some external deadline where you have to crank out an article by this date, or something along those lines. So I think that's also what makes your writing that much more, from my perspective at least, that much more powerful, because it's coming from sort of deep inside of you. And I do find sometimes that a lot of writing about autism is very much more analytical, much more sort of calculated, much more in some ways rehashing of all of the same safe themes and ideas and perspectives. So
mine sort of bypasses the consciousness somehow, or the consciousness is used just to sort of tweak it and things, but it sort of comes up of its own accord.
In many ways from the heart, and I think that's what you said in your most recent article. You talked about,
yes,
yeah, that's not, I got a chance to read it, but I don't think it's been put out there yet, has it?
No, it'll be up soon.
Very good. And
it'll
I think
by the time people see this.
And it was called A Condition of the Heart. Yes. Am I right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, yeah. It's called Autism: A Condition of the Heart. Yeah.
And you said something earlier that I want to go back to. You talked about autism as being almost a condition of incredible sensitivity versus some kind of disability or medical condition in the way it's traditionally thought about, which I think again is that perspective is now gaining a bit more traction, especially as the voices of people with autism are getting, I think, I would say getting, not only getting louder, but getting a bit more attention than historically was the case. So yeah, that's that challenges, doesn't it, all of the assumptions that have been made historically about autism. And then it also really spotlights the challenge for all of us, and I'm thinking particularly here about professionals who are supporting, educating, whatever the word is, people with autism, that if the quote unquote condition that we're treating, addressing, whatever it might be, is one of incredible sensitivity, in many ways that puts a lot more responsibility on me to approach my interactions with individuals on the spectrum very differently. And that's one of the things that's inspired me about your work, but it's also something that I think sometimes makes professionals uncomfortable, because none of us want to consider the possibility that we've been less than really sensitive in our interactions with people or with children with autism. But I think that's a very important perspective that professionals really need to hear more about. And I wonder if you have thoughts about that, especially because you've had opportunities to work with a range of professionals or interact with a range of professionals to, together with your son, both at the MIFNE Center and then whatever, community-based support you've had in schools. But I wonder what your perspective is about that piece, about how perhaps how difficult it can be sometimes for professionals to really approach Daniel or any child with autism with real sensitivity.
Yeah, so we have that experience, that first-hand experience as a family. However, I'm not sure how useful that experience is, because when we went to the MIFNE Center, we learned, or a lot of what I'm saying now was triggered by a lot of the things that I learned there. A lot of the things that a lot of the ways that I saw them and learned from them about how they interacted with Daniel and how they interact with other children, really, when you get used to it and think about it, it's just common sense and nothing else. It's just very, very obvious, but it's also almost unsuspected in daily life. For us, it was a revelation. For us at the time, it was like, wow, we've been treating him in a way that doesn't really respect who he is, that it doesn't respect it because it doesn't notice, doesn't recognize. We weren't seeing him for who he actually was. We were judging him by the presentation that he gave and how we evaluated and judged that presentation. So after that, most traditional professionals didn't really have much of a chance with us. we weren't able to give them a really, a fair hearing, because the sorts of support we were getting was so far removed from what was, what we'd learned, and what we'd learned in a way that seemed really obvious to us. Plus, here in the UK, the support available to parents is extremely limited, and I don't want to say anything about the people who deliver it, but they're not given the resources to be able to put that consideration into how they do things. A lot of even the speech and language classes are massively oversubscribed. There's huge numbers of people in there with completely disparate needs and conditions, and it's really difficult for the therapists to have the space to develop things in a way that would really work for children. It must be very frustrating for them. But that's why we didn't get the support that we felt we needed for Daniel. And so I'm probably less useful than you might think in terms of knowing how professionals can individually do, make that transition.
Well, it's of course incredibly fortunate that you found the MIFNE Center, and then of course we're able to have that as in some ways your first experience. But when you said professionals subsequently really had no chance because they you had such a powerful experience where it sounds like the team there was incredibly sensitive to Daniel, really tuned into his experience, and so what they provided was a sort of a fresh lens, a way of looking at and approaching Daniel, understanding some of his challenges or his struggles to interact with people or just kind of move out into the world. So you got to see that, and then immediately that impacted your I think probably the entire way that you approached interacting with Daniel. And so I wonder how, because I really get this picture as having worked with so many individuals on the spectrum for so many years. There's such a mismatch between, in some ways, what what individuals or children with autism need in terms of being approached with enormous sensitivity, in many ways kind of slowing the typical pace of social interaction down, and then addressing some of just the sensory overload of everyday life. It's almost like the world is moving at a pace that is so fast, and people's natural way of interacting is so jarring that in many ways individuals on the spectrum are working so hard to try to compensate. Exactly. Yes. So I think that's one of the most important components or pieces of the Transforming Autism Project mission, is to really try to get that understanding out there, and really inspire more and more, especially, you know, professionals, schools, institutions, to really understand that.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could say more about that, because it's something that you experienced very directly, that you learned, but also that you was also, I think, a fit with how you were already thinking about your son. You just needed a bit more. Yeah.
Well, at that time, you know, we were like every parent, we were in the situation of something's happened, something's changed, we don't know what to do about it. And so we were to some extent in a state of panic. The autism itself hadn't been confirmed when we went to MIFNI. So, you know, until very close to when we went, we didn't know that it was autism at all. We just knew that there was something different about our son, who'd been extremely, you know, happy and joyful and communicative and interactive in his first year. And that all suddenly went, and there was no communication with him at all. And so we weren't in a state of mind to be thinking, right, well, let's try and understand what's happened here. It's clearly that they're sensitive. We just didn't have any idea. And it took that journey to Israel for us to sort of take that step back in our perception and our understanding, and to you know, to be able to absorb that and, you know, integrate that new perspective into our lives, which now seems very, very obvious, but we needed a little help to connect to it at that time, even if it was innate within us. So yeah, getting that message out is central to me in terms of what the charity needs to do. It's, you know, it started with the book, it started with the TED Talk. You know, the articles have continued it. You know, and I'm really keen for that to go out there. But actually, what we want to do next is start sending people out into the community and start working with autistic people, autistic children, very young autistic children, with this perspective in mind, so that we can then say, look at the changes this is making, look at the difference it's making, look how it transforms people's lives.
Yes. Yes, I'm covering the microphone here because of the outside noise. One thing that I wonder about is, since your experience at MIFNI, now that was now years ago, some years ago.
Yeah,
so yeah, it was 2011.
8 years.
Yeah. So almost a decade ago or so. But I wonder then, since that experience, what your journey has been like with Daniel, especially in terms of trying to be the best parent, father that you can be, also knowing that that the social world is going to not always be so welcoming and so sensitive and supportive,
yeah,
of Daniel, and that he's at times going to struggle still.
Yeah. It's been a bumpy ride. It's been a very bumpy story. So we went to Israel to the Mifni Center when he was 1. He was just he was just over 2. He was 2 1/4. When we arrived, it was a really stressful journey just to get there, just to get into the aeroplane. There was lots of screaming. We thought we were going to get thrown off the plane. He didn't want to leave his pushchair. It was all quite chaotic. The only reason we didn't get thrown off the plane is because he cried himself to sleep.
Wow.
as one of the people was approaching us to ask us to leave. So we got on the plane. When we came back, it was a totally different story. He marched proudly up to the door, walked onto the plane with us hand in hand, sat down. He was enjoying the whole experience, very happy to give up his pushchair. And for the following months and few years, that trajectory continued. We continued the work that they were doing there and that we were learning to do there. We continued that with him, both formally, in a room alone with him for several hours a day, which was really hard work, but very, very positive work as well, because you could really see it bearing fruit. And then when he started to go to nursery, and then when he started to go to school, we didn't do so much formal stuff in the room. That was phased out, but we'd integrated a lot of what we'd learned to do in the room into daily life anyway. And that whole understanding of him has totally, transformed the way that we interact with him. So it's like we've almost not been angry with him for his whole life, which is, which is unusual for any parent, but it's come directly from what we learned when he was very small, and how we've learned to see him and how we've learned to understand him and respond to him. So the first few years he went to a mainstream school, which was pretty overwhelming for him at the beginning, because it was very busy, hectic, a lot of activity. It was a big school. But his attitude was, I want to do this. I'm going to do this. He had this determination. Wow. And he had, he had this, real openness from the day he came back from Mifni, actually. And he became so interested in the world and so trusting of other people as well. Because once we were on the bus, and a lady on the bus started talking to him, and he was very happy about it. And then the woman said, "Okay, it's time to go now." And he gave her his hand. He was ready to go with her, because he was so delighted that that someone had spoken to him, and he was so happy for any sort of interaction. And so he was so happy and so full of anticipation to go to school, and he was so determined to make it work that he did make it work. And he became used to the sensory challenges, and he overcame them. And they were stopping his academic ability at the beginning as well, and he was right at the bottom of his class. And within a couple of years, he was really excelling, and he was at the top of his class because he put the effort in, and he had that joy of going to school. What happened then was that his way of communicating was a little different still from the other children. And when he was about 6, 7, it led to the start of a bullying incident. So the other children in the school were in his class were quite unkind to him in a low-level way, but continuously over a long period of time. And that led to another regression. So it led to another withdrawal, and a very, very difficult and painful period for him, and for us, of course, as well. So then we moved him purely for that reason, purely for that social reason, to an autism school. And he's been there since last year, and he's again rediscovering his joy in life and his happiness, although he does still carry the marks of what's essentially a trauma for him, a very deep trauma.
Yeah, of course. Of course, that's the case, right? Where and that's one of the one of the things I see so often in my work is how many children on the spectrum are suffering from social interactions with people who, for many reasons, decide to target them and bully them, and it can be very, very painful for families as well as for children to be on the receiving end of bullying. And I think one of the one of the incredibly challenging things that I see is that it's almost like it's important to have this incredible sensitivity to our children, and to really interact with them in ways that is sensitive, that also tunes into some of their vulnerabilities, and makes interaction a bit easier for individuals with autism. But then what then also can happen is that in a way, some of our kids can get a perspective about the social world that's maybe not always so accurate, right?
Yeah.
That we can interact in ways that are again sort of more fine-tuned, more sensitive, more supportive. But then when they approach someone that is not tuned into their unique communication style, or some of their maybe sensory overload, or whatever it might be, it almost can be even more jarring, because perhaps their expectations of the social world are that people will meet them where they are and not be so judgmental and not be perhaps harsh. So I think about that all the time in my own work, how important it is to do both, to really try to help kids develop like social resilience and an ability to almost handle environments or situations or people that are not going to be supportive and accommodating. And that's a really hard thing to do, to balance.
Yes.
And so I wonder about your perspective on that, and how you and your wife are trying to do that with.
It's exactly, it's a really, really difficult balance. First of all, I want to say that, you know, what you were saying about children being affected by the social interactions that they've had, and very often children close down because of that, and children shut themselves off and protect themselves from what they see as very dangerous social interactions. And the sad thing about it, it's all very sad, but one sad thing about it is that people then look at what the behavior that they're exhibiting by protecting themselves and go, oh, that's autism. That's right. Autistic people protect themselves from social interaction. That's just part of the condition. That's what they're neurologically wired to do. But it's not true. I know that that's not true. I know it's not the case, because I've seen, you know, Daniel, my son, has been very lucky to have opportunities to be in situations where there wasn't that risk, where he didn't feel threatened. And his social interaction in those situations has been what anybody would consider as standard in social interaction. The avoidance comes because, and this goes back to autism being about sensitivity, the avoidance comes when that sensitivity hasn't been respected, and they're carrying the trauma of that sensitivity not having been respected, and they're carrying the fear, the very real and justified fear, that sensitivity is not going to be respected next time as well. They have every reason to protect themselves. Anybody would protect themselves if they were faced with that sort of very, very profound threat that they perceived. So sorry, I just thought of that when you talked about the children being affected by the social interaction. You asked me something different though, and I can't remember. Oh, the balance about resilience. Yes, and that's one of the challenges. It's like, you know, if my son has, you know, sometimes he gets fearful about certain things that it's not rational to be fearful about. And it's like, to what extent do I encourage him to take a bold step forward and recognize that the fears that he has are not justified? You know, if I don't do that enough, I'm letting him down by not giving him the opportunities to grow that he needs, by not giving him that support that only a parent can give him to grow and to become resilient and to overcome the irrational fears that he's got. He needs that and he wants it. But if I do it too much, I'm letting him down as well by pushing him, by making it overwhelming for him, by putting too many demands on him. And as a parent, getting that balance is something you have to be totally, you know, you'll never get it right, but you need to be totally conscious of all the time.
Absolutely, Guy. And I think that's, from what I see, that's also one of the greatest challenges for parents of children on the spectrum, is not only trying to find that balance, but then being accepting of one's own limitations, challenges, mistakes. And I think that in many ways, the well-intentioned field of autism, education, treatment, etc., has I think unintentionally sent a very even toxic message to parents, right? That there's like a right way to do it, and there are all these techniques and the evidence-based, and so parents are left feeling, from what I continue to learn about families and parents that are doing their best to raise children on the spectrum, parents can absolutely turn that inward and blame themselves. For not being good enough, not doing what they should be doing to support their kids. And so I think this has been a major problem, especially in the US, where our approach to autism has been very sort of medical model based, where the therapist kind of fixes, treats the child, and then supposedly kind of trains the parents on all of these, like the proper techniques for how to do it. It really sets up, I think, it can really set parents up to feel like they're failing. And so I wonder for you know, for you and in your experience, like what helps you, what keeps you going as a dad, as a parent under some of those conditions? Because every parent is gonna at some point is gonna feel those things. And I think that can really, I've seen that really, like, how can I say, really level parents, really in some ways shut parents down, and in some cases really disconnect parents from the whole experience of being present and raising their kids. So you can imagine this, right? There's so many dads that I've had opportunities to work with that sometimes in some ways just give up and disengage from trying to father or parent their child, because they feel like they just can't, they're not getting it right, they can't do it. And you know, from my experience, most men like to be involved in things where we get some kind of feedback that, like, we can do something right, or we're contributing. And when that's not happening as a dad, I think, you know, sometimes parents, especially fathers, can really disengage from that incredibly challenging task and job. And of course that has really not good long-term consequences. So I'm asking this because you've had your own experience with this, and I think, you know, I always wonder, like, what's kept you going, and how have you dealt with some of those challenges as a dad?
Well, first, I want to say that, you know, I don't want to claim that I'm anything special with this. I've been extremely fortunate, probably in the most fortunate 0.001% of parents, to have been exposed to and to have been given a chance to assimilate and to absorb into myself some really good understanding about children. You know, it's not come from me. It's because I've been exposed to that, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And even with that, I mess up all the time. I get things wrong all the time, or or I think I'm doing a great job, and then I look back a year later and go, God, I can't believe I did that. So yes, that just to put me into context. So I'm not talking as someone who's got it all mastered.
Of course.
But guilt is, we have to avoid guilt. Guilt is the most destructive force, because what happens when you're guilty, when you feel guilty, is you're giving yourself all sorts of negative messages. They're just there inherently. They're things like, I have failed, I'm not a good parent, I can't bring up my child. This stuff, when you feel guilty, is going on unconsciously. And what happens when you're reinforcing those beliefs in yourself is they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and they guarantee continued failure. The only way to manage guilt is to really find some way, and I'm not saying it's easy, find some way to take a step back from the situation and just tell the truth about the situation, because the truth is never for anybody, I failed. The truth is never for anybody, I'm not good enough, or I can't bring up my child. To really sort of put those truths into themselves, I think that's probably the best way. What helps me with that, again, it's something, it's something that has been given to me, I guess, in a way. I think that I do heartfulness meditation. I've been doing it for 20 years now. I think that more than anything has enabled me to arrive at a condition where it's very rare for me to feel guilty, and to really understand the power that guilt has to destroy people's potential.
Wow. That's so clearly said. I don't know that I've heard anyone yet, at least, that parents that I've spoken with really spotlight so much how destructive guilt can be. And but as I'm applying it, thinking about a lot of the families that I've worked with, you're exactly right that so many families can get really stuck there. And then the loop feeds on itself in many ways, right? The negative thoughts, it's my fault, and I'm bad, and
then the next thing is that feeds into a cycle of failure, and then the failure is further evidence to justify the guilt.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. And so, it sounds like for you especially, your meditation practice has really helped you to perhaps just recognize some of those thoughts, let them go, and also perhaps develop more compassion, acceptance for yourself and who you are and what goes through your mind and your heart on any given day.
It's a condition that develops naturally through doing the meditation over a period of time.
And it's interesting, Guy, because I also have a meditation practice, and I believe the same is true for me, that I've become much more compassionate towards myself as a professional, and more accepting of my own mistakes and limitations and quirkiness, my own stuff, and I don't get as stuck when I'm for example working with a particular family or group of professionals, and I feel like I'm not doing my best, or I get stuck, or things don't go as I hoped. So I think there's a lot of really important stuff there, and I think that what I see so often in my own work, that even if families don't develop like a meditation practice or have a path that involves that kind of opportunity, a big part of my work is really focused now on video, and really really helping, really using video of interactions between parents and their children to help parents develop what my mentor would call a new self picture. And I'm grateful to Maria Arts and her approach, which is called Marta Mayo, which means on one's own strength, to really helping, she really kind of, since the 70s, has been developing this particular way of working with certainly with families as well as professionals to strengthen their interactions with individuals with a huge range of unique communication styles, social challenges, whatever it might be. And really the most powerful component is helping parents as well as professionals see their own strengths in their interactions with either their own child or the people that they're serving. And I wonder about your experience with that, especially through not only through the MIFNI clinic, but also if you've been able to do that as well, to perhaps generate for yourself a picture of yourself as a as a dad or as a person, where you're able to, even on your at sometimes your most difficult times, you can still see like your own strengths, your own abilities, uniqueness as a person, any of that. I wonder if you've had an experience like that that's helped you.
Not in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess maybe. I mean, I guess maybe this is something that's also come out of the meditation practice, is that I don't really focus on myself so much, on whether I'm doing a good job or a bad job. It goes for, bringing up Daniel. It goes for running the charity. It goes for what I write. It's just, I have a job to do, and I need to do it. And I need to do it to the best of my ability. I don't control what my ability is. If I do it to the best of my ability and it doesn't work, well, in all of these things, there's nobody else to do that job anyway. So it's only academic to worry about whether I'm doing a good job or not. I'm doing the best job that I can. But I guess that is, implicitly, yes, a level of self-acceptance, I guess. And it wouldn't make sense to put impossible demands on myself. It wouldn't make sense to put demands on myself to be better than I am in any of those areas, because the only thing that would do would be to invite guilt and to undermine and to bring the best that I can be down. Yes. Whereas if I have the acceptance, it gives it space to grow. But you can't just say to someone, have acceptance. It's part of a condition that everybody needs to evolve into in their own way.
Right. And I mean, I love what you said, Guy, about being able to think about it as you're always doing the very best that you can. And I think that's where people when people lose sight of that, that's when things can get incredibly, in some ways, where I see like we can all be our worst enemies, right? When we're not seeing that we're doing the very best job, because that's where the regret and the guilt and all that whole cycle comes in, right? And I think that maybe in a way, that's also what you're well, I don't know, this is a question. Is that one of the things that you are also then trying to help Daniel develop? That sense that he's always doing the very best that he can, and maybe he already has that approach, or that sort of.
I think implicitly, yeah. Implicitly, that is what we're trying to do. It's like we don't frame it like that and think of it like that, but yes, absolutely. What we're very explicit. There's one sort of thing, one almost a mantra that I tell him all the time and try to get him to live by, which is everything's okay. Whatever happens, everything's okay. And implicitly, that's saying you're strong enough to deal with everything. You've got the resilience, you've got the capability, you've got the flexibility, even if you don't think you have, to deal with whatever comes along and know that it's not as devastating as it might initially feel.
Mm. Mm. Wow. And then, of course, I think about what you just said, Guy. If when Daniel looks up at you and your wife and sees that in your face, or hears that in your tone of voice, that you believe in him,
Yeah.
and that strongly, that sincerely, that deeply, I really believe that he carries that with him. And I think this is what we also know from years of research in child development, that when children have an adult that they've had that experience with, maybe just one, and it maybe not even a parent, right? Someone who really believes deeply in them and gives them the message that that you can do this, and I know, and everything's going to be okay. You're okay. That has a profound ripple effect.
And it's the sincerity. It's the sincerity that he picks up. That's the key part of it. So I don't know how you would do research on that, because it could be quite skewed. Because if a parent says, oh, everything's okay, you're fine, don't worry about it, and they're not really believing and feeling that themselves, then the child is going to be, all right. They're going to know. They're going to know. And my theory is that autistic children are even more sensitive, even more perceptive, and able to tune into the underlying feelings and beliefs and sincerity of other people. So if it's said without sincerity, it might as well not be said.
And I think that I've seen that in my own experience over and over and over again, that sometimes when parents are overwhelmed and stressed and pushing themselves, that they can, the words can come out, we're fine, everything's fine, you're good, I'm good, and in some way they're trying to convince themselves of that without really feeling it or believing it. And I think that I've certainly seen many children, whether they have autism or not, or they're excuse me, typically developing, they pick up all of that, that they can see and feel in their parents' facial expression, tone of voice, body language, the stress, not the calm, confident reassurance, because it's not there, even if the parent is trying to say the right thing.
And it's damaging. That's damaging in so many ways, because it's damaging because, at least if you don't say it, the question doesn't necessarily come up. If you bring the question up and then, by what you're feeling, give them the answer that thing that you're telling them isn't true, then they're getting a message that they need to absorb, whether they want to or not, although they probably would anyway. It also gives them a real sense of unease and insecurity about the social world, because they're having somebody who they really trust to be their guide, who's telling them one thing and believing another, and there's that mismatch. And so how can I trust anything that anybody says?
And I think that is one of, and I look forward to more of your writing or perspective about this particular topic or issue, Guy, because I think it's so powerful how, for many reasons, especially I consider myself a neurotypical person, so I'm thinking I'm coming at this from my own lens, but I know that neurotypical people oftentimes can learn and can be trained to make statements or say things that are completely inconsistent with what I'm feeling or what we're feeling on the inside.
Almost expected.
Yes. And again, like that happens for many reasons. For example, in my own case, I grew up in a family where my parents always did the very best that they could, but they didn't have necessarily their own role models that were showing how you could speak from your own emotions and your experience in a very open and honest way that wasn't really allowed or permitted. So generations can pass on this way of being in the world that's where there's a complete disconnect between what you're saying publicly and what you're feeling on the inside. And it in many ways it sounds like this is part of what can be so incredibly confusing for someone on the spectrum who's for whom it perhaps is more difficult to learn how to communicate in that very disconnected way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's you could say it's difficult for them to communicate, and so they have a weakness, or you could turn it the other way around and say they have the strength of being able to perceive things that are sincere and aren't sincere, and to be able to discriminate between the two, and to be ready and willing to build a world which is based on sincerity, which is based on openness, where there's no judgment, so there's nothing to hide. These are things that anybody would say that they wanted in the world, but it's the autistic person that's ready to bring them, that's ready to put their money where their mouth is and bring them. And so it's a strength that the autistic person brings, and it's a weakness that everybody else brings, I guess, that we have to argue and say things that we don't mean, and represent ourselves in ways that other people have to work out, which is not always an obvious thing to do. I just need to remind you we have about 10 minutes left. Sorry.
Yes, and thank you, Guy, because I got so I'm so absorbed in our conversation that I also lost track of time. And the last thing I'll say is that I've always really admired, even though, of course, as we know, it can cause social tension or social misunderstandings or awkwardness in many ways. I've always so respected and even admired the ability of people on the spectrum, children, young adults, teenagers, whatever, to say what they're thinking and feeling without being first, without censoring it to cater to the people around them. And so I've always thought, I wish I could do that more. I wish I could sometimes maybe speak more honestly, openly, directly from my experience versus thinking, whoops, I don't want to ruffle too many feathers here. And I think it's a way, like you said, that people with autism can be in some ways mistreated, misunderstood, and then ultimately sort of hurt as a result. But it's something that, like you're saying, in many ways would be so great for the rest of the world to learn how to do more, to be more authentic, right?
Right.
And so it seems like, again, the message is we have a lot of work to do, like to learn from one another, and in some ways create a world that just is more understanding
It
and
works
more,
for everybody.
right?
Because the thing that the ideals that autistic people bring, these are the ideals that everybody would profess to have. Mm-hmm. And some people say, oh, why should we make accommodation for just such a small amount of people? You make accommodation for them, one, because you're a human being and you care about the experience of other human beings. But also another really big reason is because the sorts of changes you would make to accommodate an autistic person are exactly the sort of changes you would make to bring about a better world that you would be more comfortable living in.
Mm. Wow. Yes. I mean, indeed, really, I really appreciate that last sentence, Guy. And I think that that's what I strive to do in all of my interactions with people in general, but people on the spectrum in particular. And I know we're going to, at least for now, end the interview. But I just want to say thank you. I feel always like I just learn so much when I talk with you, and I appreciate your honesty, Guy, and your willingness to share your experience with me and with anyone that sees this interview. And thanks for everything that you've taught me, and I really look forward to what's to come in the next months, weeks, years, whatever, in terms of you sharing your perspective and more people hearing your perspective, because I think it will really raise the bar in terms of the care, the support that we're all able to provide for people on the spectrum and everybody. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And you're a great interviewer, by the way, because when this started, I actually had nothing to say. I was like, what am I going to say in this interview? And you very, very expertly brought, you should be a radio presenter or a television.
Maybe a side career someday. But as I said, it's easy, very easy to do with you, Guy, because I enjoy our connection and our conversation so much. So really, it was a pleasure, and I look forward to again always like reading your next article, and who knows, maybe your next TED Talk, if it unfolds naturally, of course.
Of course. Thank you, Andrew.
Yes. So we'll do it again, and thank you again, and take good care, Guy, and happy holidays, of course.